The history of heavy.
Okay.
I'm ready.
Hello and welcome to the History of Heavy podcast, episode 40. This is the show that traces the chronology of heavy music across genre, song by song. I am your host, Michael Huntsman, along with my co-host, Big Daddy David Lieberman. Big Daddy Dave Lieberman. That is him right there. Hello, Dave.
Howdy.
Dave, as Jello Biafra might say, welcome to 1972. We are here at 1972. Last week, we wrapped up 1971 by talking about Black Sabbath's third LP, Master of Reality, and now we move an inch closer to the 80s by getting into 1972, man. How you feeling?
Oh, I'm excited about tonight's episode. It's going to be a treat to talk about some new music for me, and hopefully we get to turn some other listeners on to this pretty cool song and great band.
Yeah, I think this is going to be a light and breezy and fun and interesting one, as we always do when we obviously get into full-length album conversations, as we did last week with Master of Reality. Those are very long conversations. Those are hour-long conversations. Our typical format, of course, is talking about individual songs that also sometimes go on as long as an hour. This band does
And
not...
somehow also weave Black Sabbath into it. So
That's right. That's right.
it's a smorgasbord.
Tonight we will spend 10 minutes talking about Tarkus, and then 40 minutes finding a way to talk about Black Sabbath again. Tonight I think will be a fun one. There is not a deep history to discuss about this band. There is not a lot that I know about this band, so I think it is going to be a fun, different kind of episode probably than we usually have. But what we usually do, as we will do again tonight, I think, is go into Dave's cultural corner and set the stage a little bit for what is happening. So, Dave, I know there were some mishaps this evening before we started recording. What are we talking about related to 1972 tonight?
Dave's Control!
So tonight we're talking about the 70s, but not 1972 exactly. We're talking about 73. We're talking about 1773, because December 16th, 1773 was the Boston Tea Party, ladies and gentlemen, where America, pissed off about taxes, dumped a bunch of tea into Boston Harbor. And ladies and gentlemen, I have spilled my entire pint of tea all over my computer and desk, and that is what took up my cultural corner research time tonight. So, shout out to the colonists and the patriots. Down with the loyalist royalists. No taxation without representation. Not on my watch.
I love it. I love it for a lot of reasons, but the fact that you're drinking a pint of tea says everything you need to know about the gray in our collective beards and hair. This is where we are.
So I have all these pint glasses, and I have to fill them with something, some
Right.
kind of amber liquid. I chose tea.
Perfect. Well, it is a San Francisco Tea Party. It is a Peruvian Tea Party as we get into tonight's topic. So I will set the scene a little bit. We will get significantly more into the culture of the early 70s and 1972 specifically next time.
Promise.
But tonight is all about Tarkus. Tarkus, for those of you unfamiliar, and I suspect that significantly more people than were familiar with Black Sabbath, but Tarkus were a 4-piece hard rock band from Lima, Peru. They formed in April of 1972, released their self-titled debut album on August 2nd, 1972, and then promptly broke up in September of that same year, lasting for approximately 6 months in total, until they reformed in 2007 with guitarist and lead singer Alex Nathanson as the lone original member. That year, they released a second LP, Tarkus 2, and then promptly broke up again, never to be heard from again. That is the entirety of what I know about Tarkus. And I have included them nonetheless. I have included them alongside the likes of the aforementioned Black Sabbath and Led Zeppelin and the Kinks and the Rolling Stones and the Stooges. Why, you ask? I am not sure I know exactly. I'm hoping this conversation reveals potentially why. But I think primarily, Dave, that I wanted to include Tarkus at this point because across the whole of our 39 previous episodes, we have only ever talked about artists from either America or England,
Right.
and have neglected to get into any nation at all, other than these two, and what kind of impact, if any, they have had about the formation of heavy or contributions to heavy, whether garage rock or punk rock or metal or art rock or avant-garde jazz. All of those things, all of those genres related to heavy or not, were happening in other parts of the world beyond North America and Europe. And while I don't think Tarkus's music is necessarily groundbreaking or unique, but their being from Peru, I think, is representative of how there were these little pockets all over the world where heavy was happening, and there were, hundreds of interesting bands that have been lost to the sands of time, but are now discoverable thanks to the internet. I think Tarkus is just one representation, and we will get into a lot as we continue to get into other songs and other episodes. But they are representative of not only kind of how this music was evolving in different places over time, but again, also how there are all of these little treasures that we can uncover, as obscure as a Tarkus or even a Sir Lord Baltimore, but also the deep catalogs of the more familiar artists. So that's where we'll start the conversation, and I guess I'll just start with a very simple question, Dave, and that is, what did you think of Tarkus?
I really like this song, and as as Spotify runs out of the tune and keeps moving into the rest of the catalog, um, I was liking some of the other stuff that I heard from them too. There's a thread here that is a through line to our whole conversation. So I'm really glad that you included them, not only to just turn me on to it, but also to do exactly what you said, cast a wider net for our conversation and frame it and bring some other elements in. Some of the things that I think Tarkus brings to the conversation is the reach that you were talking about, and the fact that this music is now reached a critical mass and is influencing musicians on a global scale. I think at first it was more of a community where other musicians who were really in tune with this thread were able to pick up on it and take it a little bit further, a little bit further. Well, now it's, I think, really expansive in the early 70s moment. And we talked about this with 1970 and 1971, how we spent so much time there where the sound had really sort of arrived and it was just kind of infiltrating and filtering out into Alice Coltrane, filtering out farther afield. And now we're going geographically farther. So that's one thing that I think is really important to bring to the conversation. We're at a point where the reach has become global, but also the fact that Tarkus has exactly 2 albums and 12 months worth of lifespan is also very emblematic, I think, of how this music works. It's so inspiring that it can create these little sparks that don't catch fire.
Mhm.
But this is the ember from the wildfire that is Black Sabbath. And the ember can sometimes die out, and sometimes it can spark a little hot spot over here or over there. But fast forward, and you have Sepultura, right? They're not
Yeah.
Peruvian, but they're Latin American. And I remember being a kid growing up in San Diego, and we'd go to Tijuana sometimes and seeing all this graffiti of, you know, misfits and exploited and all these Mexican punk rockers. I had no idea they were so in tune with what was going on. The Latin American community has had huge input and influence. And I mean, look at these giant soccer stadiums that all these bands will end up filling, Iron Maiden, Metallica, right? They know how to be super fans, and that didn't come from nowhere. And Metallica, for all of their credit that is due, didn't start that. That is a pinnacle that started way, way earlier. So Tarkus is a root to that tree that they're in.
That's really well said, and it's a good observation about Latin America. I mean, famously, it's Latin America and Germany are the most rabid hard rock and heavy metal audiences in the world. But heavy hard rock and metal bands will often cite how insane and big their shows are. I mean, Iron Maiden is a great example of that. But across the board, ravenous for all forms of heavy
Yeah,
in those countries, which is awesome.
yeah.
Um, I said last week when teeing up this episode that this song and this band were definitively a heavy metal band where we had really mostly only talked about kind of hard rock bands, and with Sabbath and things that tide was starting to shift. I'm not really sure I agree with myself on that comment. So, how would you define Tarkus? You know, El Pirata is the song we're specifically talking about tonight, but that song specifically, but even Tarkus broadly, would you describe them as a metal band or not a metal, a
I
heavy
would,
metal band?
yeah, I would, and I would because of actually some of the other stuff that I heard, which
Mhm.
had more metal solos, um, and this was maybe a deeper track. Um, I think that it's fair to call them. I think that it would be fair to call them a hard rock band, and it would be fair to call them a heavy metal band. I think it just has to. It depends on your mood and your personal location on the spectrum, how polarized you are to one side or the other. But they do really straddle that line.
Yeah, I mean, one thing I love the song El Parada specifically, which is why I chose it. And some of the elements that I love about it aren't necessarily generally associated with metal, and that is kind of there's a groove metal is obviously a subgenre of metal, but there is a groove and a poppiness to it in
Hmm.
addition to kind of the heavy crunchy guitars that I just really love. There's an energy about it, and I hesitate to assign that to the Peruvian-ness of the band or the Latin American-ness of the band. Obviously, that's in there, but there's an energy to the song that is kind of infectious to me. Like it's got this great. It's almost like a happiness to it, even though I wouldn't necessarily describe it
Yeah,
as a happy song. It's got a happy energy.
yeah, it's a little more upbeat, and
Hmm.
the vocalist is not adding like a shreddingness to it. It's not an
Right.
anguish or a intensity. It's a very more subdued, harmonious element, which I actually like. I was
Me
a
too.
little surprised, but it's very smooth. The vocalisms are very smooth, and I just thought that that was unique, especially in our body of conversation so far. We've talked about how some vocalists have a lot of power and some vocalists have a very distinct element or a deep voice or a big range. But this was very kind of melodic and a little on the soft side. And it sort of let the rest of the music do the heavy lifting.
Yeah. Yeah, for sure. You know, the other thing that's, and this is, again, this is a band that, you know, there is not a lot public. They don't even have a Wikipedia page. Is how deep in the weeds Tarkus is. But when you do when you can find pictures of the band, they present as a heavy metal band. You know, we are still some years from Judas Priest being like the ultimate visual kind of heavy metal band. A couple of episodes ago, we spent some time talking about Ace Frehley and how I fell in love with Kiss by looking at them before I heard them. And as we creep closer and closer to the 80s and of course MTV, the visual presentation will become increasingly important. And the fact that Tarkus presented as a heavy metal band, despite how upbeat and maybe a little bit happy their music sounds, their image was like, okay, we're hard rocking dudes, you know, we're part of this new thing.
Yeah, flying V's and
Yeah.
all and
Yeah.
bangs and curly hair. Um, Not to be confused with the Emerson Lake and Palmer album
Right.
called Tarkus, which is a very confusing thing, which came out in 1971, by the way. So, uh, just an interesting little intersection in our timeline. Who came first? The
Yeah, it feels
band?
a little bit like the Coven Black Sabbath thing. You know, there's so
Yeah.
many. I just did a TikTok video about Coven on the History of Heavy TikTok channel. There's a lot of potential coincidences between Coven and Black Sabbath, and that, by all accounts, it seems that was in fact the case. That Black Sabbath wasn't ripping off Coven necessarily. I think ELP and Tarkus are the same thing. They're so close together that it's hard to imagine that.
But that kind of proves my earlier point. This is this critical mass moment where their ships, but they're kind of actually going. They're sailing on the same seas, right? Like they're in the same stream of consciousness, and this is to be expected.
When you think about the other songs we've talked about leading up to this one, are there, you know, we've talked about some clusters, like, you know, that we've got sort of, and part of this is popularity, of course, but we talked about, you know, Sir Lord Baltimore and Atomic Rooster kind of a piece, and um you know, Cream and Blue Cheer are kind of a piece. Is there a bucket you would put Tarkus in? Like, are there other songs that we've talked about or other bands we've talked about? Because th- I don't think they're this totally unique sounding band necessarily, but I'm not sure exactly. Like, if I was telling somebody, hey, you should check out Tarkus, they sound like dot dot dot, I'm not sure who I would say.
Interestingly, I sent you a text earlier about a song that came up earlier in our conversation. Did you have a chance to do the juxtaposition
I
there?
did. That's why I teed you up right now. You're talking, of course, about Uriah Heep's Gypsy.
I am indeed, sir. And did you hear the same echoes that I heard?
It
This
definitely
in the
feels of a
vocal line,
piece.
there's the pace is different. Uriah
Mhm.
Heep's Gypsy is slower and heavier, but there was a vocal rhythm that they were doing, da da da,
Yeah, yeah.
and I heard that in Tarkus, and I'm like, what am I hearing? And I had to keep listening to it until I figured out what it was. And while it's not a direct analog of one another, again, it really felt like, all right, here's this band in the stream of consciousness of what's happening around the world in this genre of music, right? Or across genres, if you will. But they're much closer to these heavier genres than some of the other stuff we've listened to. And so, yeah, I heard Uriah Heep. Now, that Uriah Heep song is pretty unique in Uriah Heep's catalog, right? So they move away. So it's this Venn diagram where this is the stream of consciousness of the moment. And the moment passes for some people. And for some bands, or for some bands, it's a moment that passes and they continue on. For this band, this was their whole moment.
Yeah, yeah, that's exactly right. I think one of the things, yes, the song Gypsy and the song El Pirata, for sure. There is a melody, the vocal melody shares some familiarity for
Yeah.
sure. The other thing that the songs have in common, which is true of many songs we've discussed, Blue Cheer and Cream included, and several others, and as we get into Alice Cooper and a bunch of stuff going forward, and that is 1970s amplification and 1970s, late 60s and 1970s amplification and production that, you know, Caius and Fu Manchu and Sleep and all of those bands would bend over backwards to recreate via tube amps and effects and all of these things to try to sound like those Sun and Orange amps back in the day.
Yeah.
That just, it sounds so great on this Tarkus song and
Yeah.
on the Atomic Rooster song and on the Thriller. You know, that sound of 70s hard rock amplifiers just sounds so gritty and warm and awesome.
Yeah, it's got a three-dimensionality to it that there's a time and a place for really well produced or highly produced music, but there's a warm, it's fuzzy feeling. Right? It's like a fleece jacket of heavy music. It's fuzzy, it's thick. Um, it kind of wrap yourself in.
Yeah, that's a good description. I came across a song from the new or most recent Metallica record that I really dig called Shadows Follow. It's a song I hadn't heard. I've never listened. The 72 Seasons record is the one I'm talking about. I haven't ever listened to it all the way through. This song popped up and I really dug it. So I put it on. I have this like heavy rotation playlist that I take songs on and put them off, and it just kind of this dynamic playlist that I'm always updating and changing. And that song came on alongside like a pigs song and a Melvin song and a whatever. Like, you know, it just came up in this mix that's got all this different. It's got Nick Cave on it, and it's got Depeche Mode. It's got all this shit on it. And this Metallica song came on, which I really like. I think it's a great song. But in the context of this conversation, Dave, the production on this song is so perfect. Like, it is so big and it feels like no human hands have ever touched it. Like, it feels, it's a song I really like. And look, I love old Metallica as much as we all do, but it sounds so manufactured. Like, there is not a snare hit out of place. There is not the slightest echo out of sync. Like, it is this perfect manufactured thing. And you compare that to this Tarkus song, which is four dudes in a room that would never record together again in this fleeting moment in Peru that was captured forever in time. You know, they have 455 monthly Spotify listeners in 2025 as to Metallica's 35 million or whatever it is. And it's just got a heart and a life and an energy to it that is, again, this time capsule of heaviness that is just so great. Like, it's got so much character and humanity in it, for not to be too goofy about it, but it sounds alive, which is just, I just dig it.
Yeah, that brings us to the beginning of our discussion with garage rock. The the rawness of garage rock, and then you get the Kinks giving us some more texture, but it's still raw. It will be some time before we get very produced. We're going to move there pretty quickly. I think we're going to have some brackish sound where we get a little bit of production and a little bit of fuzziness goes too, and then it's going to be evolving towards more production. But um, that's a hallmark of heavy, is that raw, garagey, fuzzy production, and it's very present here. It's definitely very present.
Yeah, and that through line that you do a good job of kind of bringing us back to every week, that traces things like I can't get no satisfaction through Journey to Sachadawanda by Alice Coltrane, through Iggy and the Stooges, to through Tarkus. Is, they're all sonically, none of those songs really sound anything alike, but they all are heavy in their own kind of interesting ways, sometimes sonically, sometimes characteristically, sometimes lyrically, sometimes vocal, whatever it is. And Tarkus has this interesting little corner. I think that there is a character to the song and this music that I think is heavy, although it doesn't jump out of your speakers as necessarily heavy. There's a weight
Yeah.
to it for sure.
Yeah, I think they belong in our conversation. I think they belong in the halls of heavy. And if we can get their Spotify monthly listeners to, 600 or 650, I think we're doing good work.
I love it. I love it. We should start a listen to Tarkus campaign.
Yeah.
There are not more important things to talk about in this day and age as we sit here in November
No,
of
no.
2025. Let's focus on that and let the outside world do whatever the fuck it's doing.
You know,
Um,
that's next thing I'm going to do is next time there's a demonstration, I'm going to go and have just a sign that says "Listen to Tarkus."
That's great. I love it. There is something important that I haven't mentioned to you and isn't necessarily applicable tonight, but we did talking about Black Sabbath in this episode, so this is the way that I will do it.
Okay.
Not maybe I don't think applicable to tonight. Maybe there's something out there that I am unaware of. But one of the questions that I brought to ask you or bring to the conversation every week, as Sabbath started producing music, and now we're 3 albums deep into Black Sabbath. The question is, for each artist, what Black Sabbath cover did this artist do? So I couldn't find one for Tarkus, but let me ask you this way, just maybe as a fun, interesting way to ask the question. Dave, which Black Sabbath song should Tarkus have done?
Hmm. 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 Now, I think in order to answer this question, the rules are which existing Black Sabbath song when this album comes out do they have to choose from?
Oh, okay, then that discounts the one that came to the top of my mind. So I'll have to think about it.
Because I would probably go with After Forever.
Okay. I could hear that. I could hear that. I was going to say Children of the Grave. There's a little bit of chugginess to
Yeah.
El Pirata. The song that immediately came to mind was Hole in the Sky because it's got the dun 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 dun, the
Yep. Yep.
has the kind a little bit of the same energy.
But they will have been long broken up before we ever hear from that. So
That's true. That's true. Okay, that we don't need to dive any further into Black Sabbath
that's
tonight.
not true. Because, ladies and gentlemen, I got from the Black Sabbath website in my email today the holiday shopping guide.
I got it
So
too. We
that
will.
that concludes our Black Sabbath references.
Everybody go buy Black Sabbath gear.
Something, a tie.
Uh, okay, Dave. Well, this is the part of the show that we call Song v Song, where we pit our current song champion, the song that we have decided individually is the heaviest and most important and favorite to date of the songs we've discussed, and pit it against this episode's song of discussion. My current champion is The Who's Won't Get Fooled Again from episode 35. Dave, you had a big upset 2 episodes ago when you selected Budgie's Guts as your new champion. That was from episode 38. That was a curveball to me, so I'm not going to pretend to know what you're going to do this week. So you tell me, how how is Budgie going to do against Tarkus's El Pirata?
I really liked El Pirata. I really like spending time with this song, but I have so much history and affection for Gus. That's going to win the day.
Okay. Yeah, for me too. The Who is going to hold for another week for me. So Guts
It's a
and
dynasty.
yeah, maybe we'll see. We'll see how it goes. Those two will hold until next time. Next time will not be next week. Next week, Dave, being the loving and proud son that he is taking his parents on a cruise. What a good boy you are, Dave. Good job.
Let me
So
tell
we
you,
will be
I'm
back
really
in.
taking one for the team with this one. Cruise is the last place I want to be. Not knocking on people who like cruises. It's just, as they say in the world of employment, it's just not a good fit.
Yeah, it sounds like a watery hellscape, but you can report back on the pod. When we do return to dig a step further into 1972, it will be the Edgar Winter Group and Frankenstein, which, Dave, was one of your contributions to the playlist. So you, my friend, will be hosting, and that is a conversation I am very much looking forward to.
Me too. And I will be prepared, and you will be doing the cultural corner. So that's how I'm going to prepare.
Perfect. Go fill up your pint of tea, clean up your mess, and bon voyage, my friend. Everybody else, see you next time, and stay heavy.
Okay, thank you. Bye.